Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Catherine Grimwald, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a park ranger at Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, avalanches, tourists who think they can hike in flip-flops, you name it. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. It started 3 weeks ago when I got assigned to lead a research team at our most remote glacier camp. The team was small, just 4 of us studying ice cores to understand how the climate changed over thousands of years. Dr. Sandra Bell was our geologist, a tough woman in her 50s who knew more about rocks than anyone I'd ever met. Tom Miller was fresh out of college, eager to learn and always asking questions. Jimmy Walsh was our cook, a local guy who'd grown up in the area and knew every trail and fishing spot for miles around. The camp sat right at the edge of the Taku Glacier, about 60 miles from the nearest road. We had a helicopter scheduled to check on us every 2 weeks, but other than that, we were completely on our own. That's how I liked it. The silence up there was something you couldn't get anywhere else, pure and clean, broken only by the distant crack of ice shifting or the call of an eagle overhead. Our job was simple enough. We'd drill deep into the glacier and pull out long tubes of ice that held tiny bubbles of ancient air. Each layer told a story about what the weather was like hundreds or even thousands of years ago. It was like reading a book written in ice. On our 3rd day, Tom found something strange while we were setting up the drilling equipment. He called me over to a flat area about 50 yards from our main camp, his voice tight with excitement. "Kate, you need to see this." I walked over and stopped short. There, carved into a large flat stone, were symbols I didn't recognize. They looked old, really old. The lines were deep and weathered, but still clear enough to make out. They formed a rough circle with what looked like a human figure in the center, arms spread wide. Around the figure were smaller shapes that might have been animals or maybe mountains. It was hard to tell. "What do you think it is?" Tom asked. "Native American, probably," I said, though something about it made my skin crawl. The Tlingit people lived all through this area for thousands of years before Europeans showed up. Sandra came over to look, running her fingers along the carved lines. "These symbols, they're not like anything I've seen in textbooks. And look at this." She pointed to dark stains in the grooves of the carving. "This almost looks like blood," Jimmy finished quietly. He'd walked up behind us without making a sound, which was typical for him. Local guys like Jimmy moved through the woods like ghosts. We all stared at him. "What do you mean, blood?" Sandra asked. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably. "My grandmother used to tell stories about this area. Said the old people used to make offerings here to keep the glacier spirits happy." "Blood offerings?" Tom laughed nervously. "Come on, Jimmy. You don't really believe that stuff, do you?" But Jimmy wasn't laughing. His face was serious, almost scared. "My grandmother was Tlingit. She said, when people stopped making the offerings, bad things started happening. Glaciers moving where they shouldn't, people disappearing in the ice." "That's just superstition," Sandra said, but I could hear uncertainty in her voice. I knelt down and looked closer at the stains. They did look like blood, old blood, brown and thick in the carved grooves. But that was impossible. This carving had to be hundreds of years old, maybe more. Blood doesn't last that long, does it? That night, lying in my sleeping bag in our small tent, I couldn't stop thinking about the carving. I'd lived in Alaska my whole adult life and considered myself pretty knowledgeable about native cultures, but I'd never seen anything like those symbols. There was something about them that felt wrong, like they were watching us. I must have finally dozed off, because I was jolted awake by a sound I'd never heard before, a low moaning that seemed to come from the glacier itself. It was deep and hollow, like wind blowing through a massive cave. But there was no wind that night. The air was perfectly still. I unzipped my tent flap and looked out. The moon was bright, casting everything in silver light. The glacier stretched out before us, a river of ice disappearing into the darkness between the mountains. Everything looked normal, but the moaning continued, getting louder, then softer, like the ice was breathing. Tom stuck his head out of his tent. "You hear that?" "Yeah. Probably just the ice settling." Glaciers make all kinds of weird noises. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. In 14 years of camping near glaciers, I'd never heard anything like this. It sounded almost alive. The next morning, Jimmy was gone. I woke up at sunrise like always and noticed his tent flap was open, blowing in the breeze. I called his name, thinking maybe he'd gone to check the fishing lines he'd set in a nearby stream. No answer. Tom and Sandra emerged from their tents, looking as confused as I felt. Maybe he went for a walk, Tom suggested, but he sounded uncertain. We searched the area around camp, calling Jimmy's name. His sleeping bag was cold, which meant he'd been gone for hours. His boots were missing, but his jacket was still in his tent. That was the first thing that really worried me. The temperature had dropped below freezing during the night. Nobody goes out in weather like that without a jacket. We followed his footprints in the snow. They led straight toward the glacier, clear as day, in the fresh powder that had fallen overnight. The tracks went right up to the edge of the ice, and then stopped. "Where did he go?" Tom asked, staring at the spot where the footprints ended. I knelt down and studied the snow carefully. Jimmy's boot prints were the only human tracks, but there was something else, marks in the snow that I couldn't identify. They were long and deep, like someone had dragged heavy objects across the surface. The marks led from where Jimmy's footprints ended, straight up onto the glacier face. "We need to call for help," Sandra said. "Get a search and rescue team out here." I tried the satellite phone, but all I got was static. That was strange. The phone had worked fine 2 days ago when I'd checked in with headquarters. I tried adjusting the antenna, but still nothing. "Could be atmospheric interference," I said, though I'd never had problems with the phone before. "We'll keep trying." We spent the rest of the day searching for Jimmy, following the strange drag marks up onto the glacier as far as we dared. The ice was treacherous, full of hidden cracks and weak spots that could swallow a person whole. But we had to try. It was Tom who spotted something that made us all stop dead in our tracks. "There," he said, pointing ahead. "Is that?" About 100 yards up the glacier, something red stood out against the white ice. We approached carefully, roped together for safety. As we got closer, I realized what we were looking at. Jimmy's jacket, the one he'd left in his tent, but that was impossible. The jacket was frozen solid to the ice, like it had been there for weeks instead of hours. Stranger still, it was positioned carefully, spread out flat with the arms extended, almost like the human figure we'd seen carved in the stone. "How did it get here?" Sandra whispered. I reached out to touch the jacket and immediately jerked my hand back. The fabric was so cold, it burned my fingers, even through my gloves. But more than that, there was something underneath it, a dark shape visible through the ice. Tom knelt down and brushed snow away from the surface. We all gasped. There was a face under the ice, Jimmy's face, eyes wide open, staring up at us. His mouth was open like he'd been screaming when the ice closed over him. But the ice was thick, at least 3 feet deep. It would have taken years for ice that thick to form naturally. "We have to get him out," Tom said, his voice shaking. I grabbed his arm as he reached for his ice axe. "No, look at the ice around him." The ice was different, where Jimmy lay darker, almost black in some places. And it was moving. I could actually see it flowing slowly around the edges of his body, like thick liquid instead of solid ice. "That's not natural," Sandra said quietly. "Ice doesn't behave like that." As we watched, Jimmy's eyes seemed to track our movement. His mouth moved, and we could hear a faint sound muffled by the ice, but definitely human. He was trying to speak. Tom lunged forward with his axe, but I tackled him before he could swing. We all tumbled onto the glacier surface, and the ice beneath us groaned ominously. "Are you insane?" Tom yelled. "We have to help him." "Look at the ice," I said urgently. "Look around us." We were surrounded by the same dark, flowing ice. It had spread out from Jimmy's position in rough circle, and we were right in the middle of it. As we watched, thin lines of the dark ice began creeping toward us. "Run," I whispered, then louder, "Run." We scrambled to our feet and ran for solid ground, the rope between us tangling and nearly tripping us. Behind us, I could hear the ice groaning and cracking. When we finally reached normal snow and looked back, the dark ice had stopped spreading. But Jimmy was gone, not gone deeper. The ice had somehow pulled him down until only a vague, dark shape was visible far below the surface. That night, none of us could eat. We huddled around our camp stove, jumping at every sound. The moaning from the glacier was louder now, and sometimes it almost sounded like words, like someone calling for help. "We need to get out of here," Tom said for the 10th time. "This is crazy. People don't just sink into glaciers." "The helicopter isn't due for another week," I reminded him. "And the satellite phone still isn't working." Sandra hadn't said much since we'd seen Jimmy under the ice. She kept staring at the carved stone near our camp, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Those symbols," she said suddenly, "I've been thinking about them all day. The human figure in the center, what if it's not just decoration? What if it's instructions?" "Instructions for what?" Tom asked. "A sacrifice," Sandra said quietly. Jimmy said his grandmother told stories about blood offerings. What if those stories were true? What if something lives in this glacier, and it's hungry? I wanted to tell her she was being ridiculous, but I couldn't get the image of Jimmy's face under the ice out of my mind. The way his eyes had followed us. The way his mouth had moved like he was trying to warn us about something. "Even if that were true," I said carefully, "what are we supposed to do about it? We can't exactly make a blood offering to a glacier." Sandra pointed at the carved stone. "Look at the stains in those grooves again tomorrow. I bet they'll be darker, fresher." I didn't want to believe her, but part of me was already starting to think she might be right. Something was wrong with this place, something that went way beyond normal, natural phenomena. As I lay in my sleeping bag that night, listening to the glacier moan and shift, I thought about Jimmy's grandmother and her stories. Maybe she'd been trying to warn people. Maybe she'd known something that the rest of us had forgotten. Maybe we were in more danger than we realized. The next morning, Sandra was right about the stone. The carved grooves were darker, filled with what looked like fresh blood, but none of us had been anywhere near it during the night. "This is impossible," Tom said, but his voice was shaking. "Blood doesn't just appear out of nowhere." I knelt down and touched one of the grooves with my finger. The liquid was warm and sticky, definitely blood. But whose blood? And how had it gotten here? "We need to leave," Sandra said firmly. "Right now. We'll hike toward the coast and try to flag down a boat or plane." "That's 60 miles through wilderness," I pointed out. "We don't have enough food or cold weather gear for a trip like that." "Then we'll make a signal fire." "Anything. We can't stay here." I was starting to agree with her when we heard the sound of a helicopter in the distance, growing louder. Our weekly supply run wasn't due for days, but maybe headquarters had sent someone to check on us after losing radio contact. We ran to the flat area we used as a landing pad, waving our arms and shouting. The helicopter circled once, then began to descend. But as it got lower, something went wrong. The engine started making a grinding sound, and the aircraft began spinning out of control. "It's going down," Tom yelled. The helicopter crashed about a quarter mile from our camp, sliding across the ice before slamming into a ridge of snow and rock. The sound of metal tearing and glass breaking echoed across the glacier for what felt like forever. We grabbed our first aid kit and ran toward the crash site. The pilot was still alive but badly hurt, blood running down his face from a deep cut on his forehead. "What happened?" I asked as we pulled him clear of the wreckage. "Engine just died," he gasped. "Never seen anything like it. All the instruments went crazy, then everything just stopped." I looked at the helicopter's engine. It was completely frozen solid, like someone had poured liquid nitrogen all over it. But the air temperature was only about 20 degrees below zero cold, but not nearly cold enough to freeze an engine that fast. "Can you fix it?" Sandra asked. The pilot, his name tag said Murphy, shook his head. "Not without parts I don't have. We'll need to call for another rescue." But when we got back to camp and tried the emergency radio from the helicopter, it was just as dead as our satellite phone. Every piece of electronic equipment we had was completely non-functional. "Something's interfering with the signals," Murphy said. "Maybe magnetic interference from the glacier itself." I didn't think it was that simple, but I didn't have a better explanation. That evening, as we shared our dwindling food supplies with Murphy, he told us about the flight in. "Strangest thing," he said. "About 10 miles out, I started seeing things, shapes moving on the glacier that looked like people. But when I flew over to check, nothing was there." "What kind of shapes?" Sandra asked. "Hard to say. They were big, maybe 8 or 9 feet tall. And they moved wrong, like they weren't quite human." Tom laughed nervously. "Come on, Murphy. You probably just saw rocks or shadows." But Murphy wasn't laughing. "I've been flying over glaciers for 20 years, kid. I know the difference between rocks and something that's moving around. That night, the sounds from the glacier were different. Instead of the low moaning we'd heard before, there were other noises, clicking sounds, like massive teeth chattering, and a rhythmic thumping that almost sounded like footsteps. I was on watch duty around midnight when I saw them. 3 figures standing at the edge of our camp, just outside the circle of light from our lanterns. They were tall and impossibly thin, and they seemed to be made of ice and shadow. Their faces were blank white spaces, but I could feel them watching us. I blinked, and they were gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Sandra, who was supposed to be sleeping but had been tossing and turning in her tent. "See what?" "Nothing, never mind." But an hour later, Sandra was shaking me awake. "Kate," she hissed, "there's something moving around the camp." I crawled to the tent opening and looked out. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then I noticed the snow near our camp stove had been disturbed. There were footprints everywhere, but they weren't human footprints. They were too long and narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. "Wake the others," I whispered. But when we checked Tom's tent, it was empty. His sleeping bag was cold, and there was a hole torn in the back wall of the tent, torn from the outside, like something had reached in and grabbed him. "Tom!" Murphy yelled, forgetting about staying quiet. "Shut up," Sandra hissed. "You want to attract whatever took him?" We followed the drag marks in the snow, just like we had with Jimmy. They led straight to the glacier, but this time they didn't stop at the edge. We could see the trail continuing up onto the ice, along with those strange claw-like footprints. "I'm going after him," Murphy said, reaching for an ice axe. "No," I said firmly. "Look what happened to Jimmy. We go out there, we're just giving it more victims. So we just leave him?" I didn't have an answer for that. What could we do against something that could freeze helicopter engines and make people disappear into solid ice? As we stood there arguing, we heard a sound that made us all freeze. It was Tom's voice, calling for help from somewhere up on the glacier. But there was something wrong with it. The voice was too loud, echoing off the ice like it was being amplified somehow. "Help me," Tom's voice called. "I'm trapped. I can't move. Please help me." Murphy started toward the glacier, but I grabbed his arm. "That's not Tom," I said. "What do you mean? Of course it's Tom." But I'd spent 2 weeks listening to Tom talk every day. I knew his voice, and this wasn't quite right. It sounded like Tom, but the rhythm was off, like someone was playing a recording at the wrong speed. "Help me," the voice called again. "Something's coming. You have to get me out of here." Sandra was studying the carved stone again, running her fingers along the blood-filled grooves. "It wants us to go out there," she said quietly. "It's using Tom's voice as bait." "You're both crazy," Murphy said. "That's a real person calling for help." He broke free from my grip and ran toward the glacier, ice axe in hand. We watched him disappear into the darkness between 2 ice ridges, following the sound of Tom's voice. The calling stopped as soon as Murphy was out of sight. We waited for hours, but neither Tom nor Murphy came back. When the sun rose, we found Murphy's ice axe stuck in the glacier about 50 yards from where we'd last seen him. It was frozen so solidly to the ice that we couldn't pull it free. There was no sign of either man, but near the axe we found something that made Sandra start crying. It was Tom's notebook, the one he'd been using to record our research data. The pages were all blank except for one message written in shaky handwriting. "It's hungry. Feed it or it will take everyone." The handwriting looked like Tom's, but the ink was dark red, blood red. That afternoon, Sandra found my great-grandmother's journal. She'd been going through my gear, looking for anything else we could use as emergency equipment, when she discovered the small leather book at the bottom of my personal bag. I'd carried it for years without really thinking about it, a family heirloom my mother had given me when I first started working in Alaska. "Kate," Sandra said, holding up the journal. "Your last name is Grimwald, right? Look at this." The journal was written in 2 languages, English and what I now realized was Tlingit. I'd never been able to read the Tlingit parts, but the English sections were clear enough. My great-grandmother, Anna Grimwald, had been part Tlingit, something my family had never talked much about. But as Sandra and I read through the journal together, I realized why my family had kept quiet about our native heritage. Anna hadn't just been Tlingit, she'd been a glacier guardian, one of the people responsible for keeping an ancient entity satisfied so it wouldn't destroy everything around it. The entity had many names in the journal: the Ice Walker, the Blood Hunger, the Glacier Heart. But Anna called it something else: the Keeper. According to her writings, the keeper had lived in the Taku Glacier for thousands of years, maybe longer. It controlled the ice, the weather, even the movements of the glacier itself. "Listen to this," Sandra said, reading from a page dated 1934. "The missionaries came again today, trying to stop the old ways. They don't understand that the keeper must be fed, or it will wake fully and take what it needs. The old pact protects not just us, but everyone who lives near the ice. If we break it, the consequences will reach far beyond our village." I flipped through more pages, finding detailed descriptions of the feeding rituals. Every month, the guardians would bring blood offerings to the carved altar. Usually animal blood, deer, bears, seals, but in times of great need, when the keeper grew especially hungry, human sacrifice was required. "Here," I said, pointing to an entry from 1942. Anna writes about her cousin volunteering to be a sacrifice to prevent the keeper from causing an avalanche that would have killed dozens of people in the village below. Sandra stared at me. "Your family were the guardians, and according to this, you're the last one." I kept reading, and my blood grew colder with each page. Anna described exactly what we'd been experiencing: the sounds from the glacier, the way electronics stopped working, the way the keeper could control ice and snow to trap its victims. But the worst part was the final entry, dated just a few weeks before Anna died. "I am too old now to serve as guardian, and my daughter has rejected the old ways. She wants to live in the modern world. Pretend our blood doesn't carry the responsibility. I fear what will happen when I am gone and there is no one left to feed the keeper. It will wake from its long sleep, and its hunger will be terrible. Only one of my bloodline can renew the pact. Only one can take on the burden of keeping it satisfied." Sandra looked at me with growing understanding. "That's why it took Jimmy and Tom and Murphy. It's trying to get your attention. It wants you." As if responding to her words, the ice began to crack and shift around our camp. The sound was deafening, like the glacier itself was breaking apart. In the distance, we could see massive pieces of ice falling into the sea, creating waves that would flood the coastal communities 40 miles away. "It's not just hungry," I realized. "It's angry." Anna says here that when the guardians stopped feeding it in the 1950 seconds, it caused the worst flooding in the region's history. Dozens of people died. The cracking and groaning grew louder, and the ground under our feet began to shake. Cracks appeared in the ice near our camp, spreading outward like a spider web. That's when I saw it, the keeper itself, rising from the heart of the glacier. It was huge, maybe 15 feet tall, and it looked like it had been carved from ice and shadow. Its body was roughly human-shaped but wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Too many joints, arms that were too long, fingers that ended in points sharp enough to cut through rock. Its face was the worst part, a smooth, white surface with deep black holes where eyes should be, and a mouth that opened too wide, revealing rows of teeth made from blood-red ice. "Granddaughter," it said, and its voice was like glaciers calving into the sea, deep and cold and full of terrible power. "You have forgotten the old ways." I tried to speak but couldn't make any sound. The thing's presence was overwhelming, like standing next to a nuclear reactor or a black hole, something so powerful it changed the very air around it. "The pact must be renewed," it continued. "Feed me, or I will take what I need from the villages below." Sandra grabbed my arm. "Kate, look at the coast." In the distance, we could see the glacier beginning to surge toward the ocean at an impossible speed. Massive chunks of ice were breaking off and creating tsunamis. If this continued, every coastal town in a 100-mile radius would be underwater within hours. "I can stop it," I whispered, finally understanding what I had to do. "But I have to take on my great-grandmother's role permanently. I have to become the new guardian." "What does that mean?" Sandra asked. I read more from Anna's journal, finding the section about the transformation ritual. The guardian didn't just feed the keeper, they became connected to it, part of its consciousness, while still retaining their human awareness. They gained the ability to control ice and weather, but they could never leave the glacier. They became immortal, but isolated, responsible for maintaining the balance between the entity's hunger and human survival. "It means I stay here forever," I said. "I become something between human and spirit, keeping it satisfied so it doesn't destroy everything." The keeper moved closer, and I could feel the cold radiating from its body like a physical force. "Choose quickly," it said. "The ice calls to the sea." I looked at Sandra, then at the journal in my hands. My great-grandmother had carried this burden alone for decades. Now it was my turn. Sandra, I said, when this is over, you need to go to the native communities near here. Tell them the Guardian has returned. Tell them the old pact is renewed. Before she could argue, I walked toward the carved stone altar, pulling out my knife. The transformation didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. When I cut my hand and let my blood flow into the carved grooves of the altar, speaking the words Anna had written in Tlingit, I felt the keeper's consciousness merge with mine. It was like being swept away by an avalanche, but instead of crushing me, it lifted me up and showed me everything. I could see the glacier's entire history, thousands of years of ice and snow, the rise and fall of civilizations, the slow dance between human needs and natural power. I understood why the keeper was angry. For 50 years, it had been ignored, forgotten, left to hunger while the world changed around it. Now it was my job to feed it, to keep it calm, to protect both it and the people who lived nearby. Sandra watched as my body changed, my skin taking on a pale blue tint, my eyes shifting from brown to white. I could feel new abilities awakening the power to shape ice with my thoughts, to call storms or send them away, to sense every living thing within 50 miles of the glacier. The first thing I did was stop the catastrophic ice surge that threatened the coastal towns. It took all my concentration, but I managed to slow the glacier's movement back to its normal pace and repair most of the damage that had already been done. Sandra helped me set up a new camp near the altar, bringing supplies from our ruined research station. She stayed for 3 days, helping me understand my new role and recording everything I told her about the Guardian traditions. On the 3rd day, the rescue helicopter finally came. "I have to go," Sandra said as we heard the aircraft approaching. "But I'll come back. I'll bring people from the Tlingit communities who remember the old stories." "Don't tell the authorities what really happened," I warned her. "They wouldn't understand." Sandra nodded. "What should I say about you? They'll expect a report." I thought about that. Tell them I chose to stay and continue the research. Tell them I'm documenting traditional ecological knowledge from local native communities. It wasn't entirely a lie. After the helicopter took Sandra away, I was alone with the keeper and the vast silence of the glacier. But it wasn't lonely. Through my connection to the entity, I could sense all the life in the area, the seals and whales in the distant ocean, the bears hibernating in their dens, the caribou moving across the tundra. I could also sense when people were in danger. 3 weeks after Sandra left, I felt a group of hikers get caught in an unexpected blizzard about 20 miles away. I was able to guide the storm away from them and create a clear path to safety. They never knew I was there. That's what I do now, protect people from dangers they don't understand while keeping the keeper satisfied with regular offerings. Usually just animal blood, but I understand that someday someone might choose to make the ultimate sacrifice like my cousin did in 1942. Sandra kept her promise. A month after she left, she returned with an elderly Tlingit woman named Mary, who remembered her grandmother's stories about the glacier guardians. Mary taught me the proper songs and ceremonies, helped me understand the deeper spiritual aspects of my role. "Your great-grandmother was my grandfather's sister," Mary told me. "We've been waiting for someone to take up the responsibility again. Now, 6 months later, I've settled into my new life. I appear to visiting researchers and park rangers as a helpful local guide who knows the area well. Most people don't notice that I never seem to get cold, or that I can predict weather changes days in advance, or that dangerous animals give me a wide berth. Sometimes, when the aurora borealis dances across the night sky, I feel my great-grandmother's presence. She's proud of me, I think. Proud that the family tradition continues. The keeper and I have reached an understanding. It gets the blood it needs to stay calm, and I get to protect the balance between the old world and the new. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life I chose. Last week, a young Tlingit woman named Sarah started visiting the glacier, asking questions about the old stories. She says she's felt called to this place since she was a child. I think I might have found my eventual successor. The cycle continues, as it has for thousands of years, and as it will for thousands more. The ice remembers everything, and now, so do I. My name is Marcus Ravencroft, and I've been hunting monsters for 30 years. Not the kind you read about in fairy tales, the real ones. The ones that wear human faces and leave behind scenes that make seasoned cops quit the force. It was January 1982 when I first heard about the Healy killings. I was a detective with the Alaska State Troopers then, working out of Fairbanks. The call came in on a Tuesday morning while I was drinking coffee that could strip paint off a car. "We got a situation up in Healy," Sergeant Morrison said, his voice tight. "Family of 4. The Andersons. Found dead in their cabin." I'd worked plenty of homicides, domestic disputes, bar fights gone wrong, the usual stuff you see in small Alaskan towns when people spend too many months trapped together in the dark. But Morrison's face told me this was different. "What makes it special?" I asked. You need to see it yourself, Marcus, and bring your stomach medicine." The drive to Healy took 3 hours through snow that fell like white curtains. The Anderson cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by spruce trees that looked like black spears against the gray sky. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind like prayer flags. The first thing that hit me was the smell, sweet and metallic like pennies left in the sun. Dr. Samuel Ashwood, our medical examiner, was already there, looking green around the edges. Sam had seen everything in his 20 years on the job. Nothing made him sick. "Tell me what we've got," I said. Sam pulled off his glasses and cleaned them with shaking hands. 4 victims. Tom and Linda Anderson, ages 35 and 32. Their kids, Jessica and Michael, 8 and 10. "Murder-suicide?" "No." Sam's voice was barely a whisper. "Marcus, they ate each other." I stared at him. "Come again?" "The parents consumed the children first. Then they turned on each other. But here's the thing. They were all well fed before this happened. I found food in the kitchen. Canned goods, frozen meat, plenty of supplies. They weren't starving." Inside the cabin, I understood why Morrison couldn't describe it over the phone. The scene looked like something out of a nightmare. Blood covered the walls in patterns that suggested the victims had been alive for a long time during their ordeal. But the strangest part was how organized it looked, like a ritual, not a desperate act of survival. On the kitchen table, I found a child's drawing. Crayon marks showed the Anderson family standing outside their cabin. But behind them, watching from the tree line, was a tall, thin figure with eyes like black holes. "The neighbors found them?" I asked Officer Jenkins, who was taking photos. "Mailman says he noticed they hadn't picked up their mail for a week when he looked through the window." Jenkins swallowed hard. "The weird thing is, Mrs. Patterson from the next cabin over said she heard laughing coming from here for 3 days straight." I walked the perimeter of the cabin, looking for tracks in the snow. What I found made my blood run cold. Footprints circled the house, human feet, but impossibly long and narrow. They went around and around the cabin like someone had been pacing for hours. But the prints stopped at the tree line, where they became something else entirely. The impressions were deep, showing claws instead of toes. Whatever had made them was much larger than any human. That night at the Fairbanks station, I spread out everything we knew. 4 dead, no clear motive, no signs of forced entry. The Andersons had simply turned on each other in their own home. I called Sam at the morgue. "What do the autopsies show?" "That's what's got me puzzled, Marcus. These people show signs of extreme hunger, stomach acids, metabolic changes, brain chemistry alterations. But they had food in their bellies. Recent meals. So they were hungry, even though they weren't starving? Impossible hunger. Like their brains were telling them they were dying of starvation no matter how much they ate." I hung up the phone and stared at the Anderson family photo on my desk. Happy faces, normal family. What could drive people to do what they did to each other? Outside my office window, snow continued to fall. The old-timers called January the hunger moon, the time when winter's grip was strongest and food ran short. But this was 1982, not 1882. People didn't starve anymore. At least that's what I thought. The second call came 5 days later. This time it was Elena Nightshade, a park ranger with Denali National Park. "Detective Ravencroft? I think we might have connected cases. I've got 5 missing hikers and a campsite that looks like your scene in Healy." Elena was tough as nails, the kind of ranger who could track a wounded bear through a blizzard and come back with all her fingers. When she said something had shaken her, I listened. "We met at the ranger station in Denali." Elena was native Alaskan, with dark hair braided down her back and eyes that missed nothing. She'd grown up in these mountains and knew them like most people know their living rooms. The hiking group was called the Winter Wolves, she said, spreading maps on the table. 5 college kids from Anchorage, doing a winter camping trip. They checked in with us a week ago, planned to stay 3 days. When did you find the campsite? Yesterday. Their gear was still there, but... Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. You need to understand. I've worked search and rescue for 15 years. I've seen bear attacks, falls, hypothermia deaths. This was different. The campsite was a 2-hour snowshoe hike into the backcountry. Elena led the way through pine forests so thick the snow barely reached the ground. When we arrived, I understood her hesitation to describe it. 5 tents were arranged in a perfect circle around a fire pit. But the tents had been torn open from the inside, shredded like paper. Sleeping bags lay scattered, stained with dark patches that could only be blood. In the center of the circle, someone had built a pile of bones, human bones, stripped clean and arranged in a neat pyramid. Where are the bodies? I asked. That's the thing. There are no bodies, just this. Elena pointed to the bone pile. The weird part is, according to my count, there are bones from more than 5 people here. I knelt by the fire pit. The ashes were cold, but underneath I found something that made my skin crawl. Teeth. Human teeth scattered among the charcoal like grim confetti. Elena, look at this. I pointed to tracks around the campsite, the same impossibly long footprints I'd seen at the Anderson cabin. But here they were, everywhere. They circled the camp dozens of times, like something had been pacing just outside the firelight. I followed those tracks for half a mile, Elena said. They lead deeper into the park, toward the old mining claims. As we documented the scene, Elena told me about the rescue call she'd received. One of the hikers, a kid named David Chen, managed to get to his radio. The transmission was mostly static, but I heard enough. She pulled out a small recorder. Listen to this. The tape crackled with interference, but David's voice came through, high and panicked. So hungry, can't think straight. Jenny started eating Tom's arm while he was still alive, and he was lodging about it. Oh God, I can hear something walking around our camp. It's tall, so tall, and it's been watching us for days. I think it's been making us hungry. I can see its eyes in the trees, and they look like holes in the world. The transmission cut to static. That was 3 days ago, Elena said. When I got here yesterday, the fire was still warm. I studied the bone pile again. 5 college kids couldn't have produced this many remains, which meant either Elena was wrong about the numbers or something else had been feeding here for much longer. Elena, have you seen anything like this before? She was quiet for a long moment. My grandmother told stories about winters when people would disappear and then come back wrong. She called it the hunger that walks. Said it came during the worst winters when people were desperate. You think this is connected to some old legend? I think legends come from somewhere, detective. And I think we're not dealing with normal people anymore. As if summoned by her words, we heard a sound from the woods, high and thin, like wind through a broken window. But there was no wind. The sound came again, closer this time. It might have been human, but no human throat should make a noise like that. We should go, Elena whispered. I looked around the campsite one more time. In the growing dusk, the bone pile looked like an altar. And somewhere in the trees beyond our vision, something was watching us with eyes like holes in the world. We made it back to the ranger station without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been followed. Every shadow seemed to move. Every tree seemed to hide something tall and hungry. That night, I called Sam at the morgue. I need you to check something for me. Look for any unusual deaths in the past month. People acting strange before they died. Especially anything involving cannibalism. Marcus, you're starting to worry me. Just check, Sam. And Sam, if you find anything, call me right away, day or night. I hung up and stared out my office window at the falling snow. Somewhere out in that white wilderness, something was turning people into monsters, and it was getting stronger. Sam's call came at 3 a.m. Marcus, you need to get down here. Now. I found him in the morgue, hunched over an open file folder. His hands shook as he poured coffee into a cup already half full. I checked like you asked, he said. 3 more cases in the past 2 weeks, all the same pattern. The files made for grim reading. A trapper named Bill Morrison found in his cabin, dead from blood loss after consuming his own fingers. A family in Nenana who had turned on each other during Sunday dinner, the children found partially eaten in their high chairs. An elderly couple in Fairbanks discovered in their bedroom, locked together in a final cannibalistic embrace. Sam, what connects these people? That's what kept me up all night. Sam pulled out a map with red pins marking each location. Look at this pattern. They're all within a 50-mile radius, and they're getting closer together. Like something's moving toward Fairbanks. I studied the map. The pins formed a rough circle with Denali at the center. What about the autopsies? Any physical evidence? Sam led me to the examination table, where Bill Morrison's body lay under a white sheet. This is where it gets really strange. Look at this. He showed me a cross-section of Morrison's brain tissue under a microscope. Tiny black specks dotted the gray matter like pepper flakes. What am I looking at? I don't know. They're not bacteria, not viruses. They almost look like seeds. The phone in the morgue rang, shrill in the quiet room. Sam answered, his face growing pale as he listened. That was the hospital, he said after hanging up. They've got 2 more cases. People brought in for psychiatric evaluation after trying to bite hospital staff. Both claim they're starving to death, but their blood work shows normal nutrition levels. I was halfway to my car when my radio crackled to life. Elena's voice tight with fear. Marcus, I need you at the ranger station. Something's happened to my partner. The drive to Denali took forever through the blizzard that had started during the night. When I arrived, Elena met me at the door with a rifle in her hands. It's Jake, she said. He went out yesterday to check the Chen campsite again. When he came back, she paused. He's not right, Marcus. Inside the station, Jake Morrison sat at a desk, gnawing on something red and raw. When he looked up, his eyes were completely black. Hey, Marcus, he said in a cheerful voice. Want some? It's really good. I found it in my supply closet. I looked closer and realized he was eating his own hand. 3 fingers were already gone, chewed down to the bone. Blood covered his chin like a bib. Jake, put that down. But I'm so hungry, he whined. Elena won't let me eat anything else. Says the food in the fridge is poisoned or something. He took another bite, his teeth grinding against finger bone. This tastes much better anyway. Elena pulled me aside. He's been like this for 6 hours. I tried to restrain him, but he bit through the rope. And Marcus, look at his feet. Jake had taken off his boots. His feet were wrong, stretched out and ending in black claws instead of toes. We need to get him to a hospital, I said. No hospitals, Jake said, still chewing. The hungry man says hospitals are full of good meat, but I'm not allowed to go there yet, not until I finish changing. What hungry man? I asked. Jake's black eyes focused on me with horrible intelligence. The tall one who walks between the trees. He's been teaching me things. About the real food, the warm food that fights back. He giggled. Want to know a secret? He's coming for you next, Marcus. Says you've been spoiling his dinner parties. Elena and I backed toward the door. Jake's transformation was accelerating. His limbs were stretching, joints popping as they reformed. The sound of breaking bones filled the room. The hungry man is old, Jake continued, his voice dropping to a growl. Older than the trees. He remembers when people knew how to appreciate good meat. He's teaching us to remember too. We made it outside just as Jake's screams turned inhuman. Through the window, I saw something that used to be a park ranger throw itself against the glass. Its arms were too long, its mouth full of teeth like broken glass. What the hell is that thing? Elena gasped. Before I could answer, something huge crashed through the trees behind us. 12 feet tall and impossibly thin, with skin like moldy leather stretched over a skeleton made of coat hangers. Its face was a hole in reality, darker than the winter sky. The Wendigo, because that's what it had to be, looked at us with eyes like black stars. When it opened its mouth, I heard the voices of everyone it had consumed, all speaking at once. Asterisk, so hungry. Been so long since good meat. You smell like fear. And that makes the meat tender. Asterisk. Elena raised her rifle and fired. The bullets passed through the creature like it was made of smoke. It laughed with the voices of the dead. Asterisk. Cannot kill hunger itself, little ones. Can only feed it. Asterisk. The thing that had been Jake burst through the ranger station window and landed beside its master. It looked at us with desperate hunger. "Run," I told Elena. We ran through the forest as inhuman howls followed behind us. Tree branches seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. The snow beneath our feet was stained red with blood from creatures we couldn't see. We made it to my police car and drove toward Fairbanks with the gas pedal pressed to the floor. In the rearview mirror, tall shapes moved between the trees, keeping pace with us easily. "Marcus," Elena said, "my grandmother's stories mention something else about the hunger that walks. It feeds on people during the winter, but in spring it has to return to the place where it was first born, a place where people starved a long time ago." "Where?" "The old mining camp at Dead Horse Creek, about 20 miles north of here." I looked at my watch. February was 2 weeks away. Spring was still months off. Which meant the creature would keep feeding, keep converting people into things like Jake until the snows melted. Unless someone stopped it first. "Elena," I said, "how do we kill something made of hunger?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then, maybe we don't kill it. Maybe we starve it instead." Back in Fairbanks, the situation had turned into a nightmare. The hospital was overrun with people claiming they were starving to death while their bodies showed perfect health. 3 more families had been found dead in their homes, consumed from within by impossible hunger. Sam called an emergency meeting at the police station. When he arrived, I barely recognized him. He'd lost 20 pounds in the past week and his eyes were sunken like he hadn't slept in days. "The infection is spreading faster," he said, his voice shaking. "I've examined 12 bodies now, and they all show the same thing, those black specks in their brain tissue. But Marcus, I found something else." He pulled out a microscope slide. "I tested my own blood this morning. Look, under the microscope, I saw the same black specks floating in Sam's bloodstream like tiny parasites." "How long?" I asked. "I think since I started the autopsies. Maybe longer." Sam rubbed his forehead. "I can feel it, Marcus, the hunger. It starts small, like you skipped a meal. But it grows. And it whispers to you. What does it say? That people are just meat that walks around pretending to be important, that the only honest thing to do is eat them." He looked at his hands. "Yesterday I caught myself staring at my assistant's throat, wondering what it would taste like." Elena had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. "In my grandmother's stories, the hunger that walks feeds on people all winter, growing stronger. But it has one weakness. It has to return to its birthplace before spring, or it dies." "Dead Horse Creek," I said. "Right, but here's the part my grandmother never told me until I was grown up. The reason the creature has to return isn't just to hibernate. It goes back to lay eggs, to make more of itself." The room went silent except for the sound of Sam's labored breathing. "How many eggs?" I asked. "In the stories, hundreds. Each one becomes a new hunger that walks. They spread across the world, turning winter into a feeding season for ancient things that should have stayed dead." I looked at the map on my desk. Red pins marked the creature's victims, forming a tightening spiral around Fairbanks. Soon it would reach the city itself, where 60,000 people waited like cattle in a pen. "We have to stop it at Dead Horse Creek," I said. "How?" Elena asked. "You saw what happened when I shot it. Bullets don't work." "Maybe bullets don't," Sam said, "but what about fire?" I thought about what Elena had said about starving the creature. What if we don't fight it directly? What if we destroy its food source? It took me a moment to realize what I was suggesting. Then the horror of it hit us all at once. "You're talking about killing the people it's infected," Elena said. "They're not people anymore," I replied. "Jake proved that. They're extensions of the creature, ways for it to feed. If we cut off that connection, it might weaken enough for us to destroy it." Sam finished. We spent the next hour planning what amounted to a massacre. There were at least 30 infected people in and around Fairbanks, all of them slowly transforming into feeding machines for the ancient hunger. Our plan was simple and terrible: track them down and kill them before they could feed their master. But first, we had to deal with Sam. "I can feel it getting stronger," he said. "Give me another day, maybe 2, and I won't be me anymore. You'll have to kill me too." "Sam, no arguments, Marcus. When I start looking at you like food, you put a bullet in my brain. Promise me." I promised. We started at the hospital, where the infected were easiest to find. They'd been restrained in the psychiatric ward, But the restraints weren't holding anymore. We found them in various stages of transformation, some still human enough to beg for help, others so far gone they attacked us on sight. Elena had brought a flamethrower from the Park Service. Fire seemed to work where bullets failed. The infected burned like paper, screaming with voices that weren't quite human anymore. By dawn, we'd killed 18 of them. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. "It's working," Sam said. "I can feel the hunger getting weaker. Whatever connection they had to the main creature, we're severing it." We found the remaining infected scattered across town, hiding in basements and abandoned buildings. Each kill got easier, which scared me more than the actual fighting. When you start getting used to burning people alive, you know you've lost something important. The last group had holed up in an old warehouse on the edge of town. When we kicked in the door, we found them arranged in a circle around something that might have once been human. It was 12 feet tall and covered in black, oily skin. When it saw us, it smiled with too many teeth. "The mother," Elena whispered. The thing spoke with Sam's voice, which was impossible since Sam was standing right next to me. "You cannot starve what feeds on fear itself, little ones. Every death you've caused tonight has only made me stronger." It wasn't true. I could see the creature was weaker, its movements slower. The infected humans around it were barely moving, like their batteries were running down. "Elena, the flamethrower," I said. "Wait," Sam stepped forward. "Let me do it." Before Elena or I could stop him, Sam walked straight toward the mother creature. It reached out with arms like tree branches, trying to embrace him. "I've been feeding it all week," Sam said without turning around. "Every autopsy, every examination, it's been eating through me. But that means I'm connected to it too." He pulled a grenade from his jacket. "Remember me as the guy who saved Fairbanks." The explosion lit up the warehouse like a miniature sun. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but ash and the smell of burned meat. But our work wasn't finished. The real creature was still out there, waiting at Dead Horse Creek. We found the Wendigo at dawn, standing in the ruins of the old mining camp like it had been waiting for us. It was smaller now, weakened by the loss of its feeding network, but still terrible to look at. Around it, the snow was stained black with something that might have been blood. "This is where it started," Elena said. 1932. The miners got snowed in for 4 months. When the rescue team finally arrived in spring, they found evidence of cannibalism, but no bodies. The creature turned its hollow eyes toward us. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through a graveyard. Asterisk, 50 years of sleeping. 50 years of dreaming of the taste of fear. You have cost me much, but winter is not over yet. Asterisk. I could see what it meant. Scattered around the old mine shaft were dozens of black eggs, each one the size of a football. They pulsed with an inner light, like heartbeats. "The next generation," Elena breathed. Asterisk. "My children will spread across the world. Every winter will be a harvest. Every blizzard will bring the hunger." Asterisk. I had one plan left, crazy and probably suicidal, but it might work. "Elena, can you get me to the mine shaft?" "Marcus, what are you thinking?" "Old mines have dynamite, explosives for blasting rock. If I can bring down the whole mountain." The Wendigo understood what I was planning. It moved toward us with impossible speed. But Elena was faster. Her flamethrower created a wall of fire between us and the creature. Asterisk. "Fire cannot burn hunger itself." Asterisk, it screamed. "Maybe not," I said, running toward the mine entrance. "But it can sure as hell cook your kids." Inside the mine, I found what I was looking for. Cases of old dynamite, still stable after 50 years in the cold. I set the charges as quickly as I could, while outside, Elena kept the creature busy. When I emerged from the mine, the Wendigo was on top of her. One of its clawed hands was wrapped around her throat while she fought to keep the flamethrower aimed at its face. I shot the creature 6 times in the back. The bullets passed right through, but they got its attention. Asterisk. "You cannot kill me, little man. I am hunger itself. I am the empty belly of the world." Asterisk. "Maybe," I said, backing toward the cliff edge. "But you know what? I'm not trying to kill you. I'm trying to bury you." I triggered the detonator. The mountain came down in a roar of snow and stone. The mine shaft collapsed, taking the eggs and the spawning ground with it. The Wendigo's scream shook the earth as thousands of tons of rock buried its children. When the avalanche stopped, The creature was trapped beneath the rubble. Not dead, things like that don't die easy, but trapped for another 50 years or more. Elena and I made it out by the skin of our teeth, riding the edge of the avalanche down the mountain. We were both hurt, both changed by what we'd seen. But we were alive. That was 30 years ago. I'm writing this now because the reports are starting again. Families found dead in their homes, strange disappearances in the wilderness, people claiming they're starving to death while their bodies show perfect health. It's 2012. The mountain has been quiet for 3 decades, but last month, hikers reported strange sounds coming from beneath the rocks. Sounds like something digging its way out. The Wendigo is waking up. The hunger is returning. And this time, I might not be strong enough to stop it. If you're reading this, and you live anywhere in Alaska, pay attention to the signs. People acting strange around food. Families who stop answering their phones. Missing hikers whose campsites are found, arranged in perfect circles. When winter comes, the hungry thing walks. And it's always looking for new feeding grounds. I'm too old to fight it again, but maybe someone younger, someone stronger, can take up the hunt. The dynamite trick worked once. It might work again. Just remember, you can't kill hunger itself, but you can starve it. And you can bury it so deep it takes 50 years to dig its way back to the surface. 50 years of peace isn't forever, but sometimes it's enough. Asterisk, Detective Marcus Ravencroft, asterisk. Alaska State Troopers, retired. Asterisk, the 15th of January, 2012. Asterisk, asterisk, note found in Detective Ravencroft's apartment following his death from natural causes. The Fairbanks Police Department has chosen not to investigate the claims made in this document, citing lack of evidence and the advanced age of the deceased. However, readers should note that winter disappearances in the Denali region have increased significantly since 2012. My name is Robert Shadowmere, but everyone calls me Rob. I've been a ranger at Denali National Park for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was April 1995 when I got assigned to the high-altitude weather station on Mount McKinley. 14,000 feet up, where the air is thin and the storms can kill you in minutes. Most rangers hate the high station duty, but I actually liked it. After 8 years flying jets in the Air Force, I was used to being alone with dangerous weather. The station itself was pretty basic, just a small building with thick walls, packed with weather equipment and emergency supplies. Radio contact with base camp, a small kitchen, 4 bunk beds, and windows that looked out over miles of ice and snow. The helicopter could only reach us when the weather was good, which wasn't very often in April. I had one problem that made the job harder than it should be. I have something called face blindness, prosopagnosia, the doctors call it. I can't tell people apart by looking at their faces. At all. I recognize people by their voices, the way they walk, their hair, stuff like that. It sounds weird, but you get used to it. Most of the time. My team was good people. Dr. Sarah Chen, our meteorologist, had been studying mountain weather for 10 years. She talked fast and knew everything about air pressure and storm patterns. Mike Torres, our engineer, kept all the equipment running. He had big hands and always smelled like motor oil. Janet Wells was our pilot, tough lady who could fly in weather that would scare most people. And Dave Kim ran our radio, keeping us connected to the outside world. The first few days went smooth. We took readings every 6 hours, sent data down to base camp, and watched the weather build up for what looked like a big storm system moving in from the west. Sarah was excited about it. She said the atmospheric conditions were really unusual and might give us some good data. That's when I first noticed something wrong with the mirrors. It was small at first. I was brushing my teeth in the tiny bathroom, and I could swear my reflection moved a half-second late, like it was copying me instead of being me. I stopped brushing and stared at myself in the mirror above the sink. Everything looked normal. I raised my hand, and my reflection raised its hand at exactly the same time. I figured it was just the altitude messing with my head. 14,000 feet can do strange things to your brain. But then it happened again the next morning. And this time, I was sure. My reflection finished brushing its teeth a full second after I stopped. I stood there, staring at myself, and everything looked right. But something felt wrong. I didn't say anything to the team. What was I going to tell them? That my reflection was acting weird? They'd think the thin air was getting to me. The storm hit on our 4th day up there, and it was a monster. Winds over 60 miles per hour, snow so thick you couldn't see 5 feet outside. We were stuck inside, taking readings and watching the weather instruments go crazy. Sarah was in heaven, recording everything and talking about unprecedented atmospheric anomalies. That's when Mike made a comment that gave me chills. "Hey, did anyone else notice the bathroom mirror this morning?" he said during dinner. "I swear it looked like my reflection was making faces at me." Janet laughed. "The altitude's getting to you, Mike. Next you'll be seeing little green men." But I saw Sarah glance toward the bathroom with a worried look on her face. She'd noticed something too. The storm lasted 3 days. By the end of it, we were all getting cabin fever, and the weird mirror thing was happening to everybody. Janet caught her reflection combing its hair when she wasn't touching her hair. Dave saw his reflection reading a different book. Sarah's reflection seemed to be writing notes, while Sarah was just sitting there. We started joking about it. Mirror people having a party, Dave called it, but I could tell everyone was bothered. When you're trapped in a small space at high altitude with no way to leave, little things start feeling big. On the morning after the storm cleared, Sarah didn't come to breakfast. "Probably sleeping in," Mike said. She was up late recording data from the storm. But Sarah never missed breakfast. She was always the first one up, drinking coffee and checking the overnight readings. I went to check on her. Her bunk was empty. The bed was made, but her clothes were scattered on the floor like she'd gotten dressed in a hurry. Her boots were gone. "She's not here," I called to the others. We searched the whole station. Small as it was, there weren't many places to look. No sign of her anywhere. Dave tried raising her on the radio, thinking maybe she'd gone outside to check equipment. No answer. Janet found tracks in the snow outside the back door. Sarah's boot prints led away from the station, toward a field of ice formations about 200 yards away. The tracks were clear in the fresh snow from the storm. "What the hell was she doing out there?" Mike asked. We followed the tracks. The ice field was full of weird formations, twisted columns and sheets of ice that the wind had carved into strange shapes. Some of them were almost like mirrors, reflecting the morning sun in bright flashes. The tracks led right into the middle of the ice field, then stopped. Just stopped, like Sarah had vanished into thin air. "This doesn't make sense," Janet said, kneeling down to look at the last footprint. "There's no wind drift over these tracks. They're fresh. But where did she go?" Mike was checking around the area, looking for more tracks or any sign of what happened. I was staring at one of the ice formations. A big curved sheet of ice about 8 feet tall, polished smooth by the wind until it was like a mirror. In the reflection, I saw Sarah. She was standing right behind me, wearing the same clothes she'd had on yesterday. I spun around, nobody there. I looked back at the ice mirror. Sarah was still there in the reflection, but now she was waving at me. Her mouth was moving like she was trying to say something. "Guys," I called. My voice came out shaky. "You need to see this." They came over and looked at the ice mirror. In the reflection, we could all see Sarah clearly. She was pointing at something and her mouth was moving, but we couldn't hear anything. She looked scared. "That's impossible," Janet whispered. "That's completely impossible." Mike reached out and touched the ice surface. In the reflection, Sarah jumped back like she'd been shocked. Mike jerked his hand away. "We need to get back to the station," he said. "We need to radio base camp right now." But when we got back and Dave tried the radio, all we got was static. The storm had damaged something, or the atmospheric conditions were still messed up. We were cut off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah trapped somehow in that ice mirror, trying to tell us something. The whole thing was impossible, but I'd seen it with my own eyes. Around midnight, I heard someone moving around in the main room. Footsteps, quiet talking. I got up and looked out of my bunk area. Sarah was sitting at the table, writing in her weather log. She looked up when she saw me and smiled. "Hey Rob, couldn't sleep either?" Her voice sounded exactly right. But something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was definitely wrong. "Sarah, where were you today? We found your tracks in the ice field, but then they just disappeared." She looked confused. "Ice field? I've been here all day. I was taking readings during the storm yesterday, and I guess I lost track of time. I fell asleep in the equipment room." "Didn't you guys see my note?" There had been no note. I was sure of that. But she seemed so normal, so much like herself. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked. "Fine, just tired. This altitude takes some getting used to." She went back to writing in the log. I stood there watching her write, and that's when I noticed it. In the black window behind her, I could see her reflection. But the reflection wasn't writing. The reflection was looking right at me with an expression of absolute terror, shaking her head frantically. I blinked and looked again. The reflection was writing normally. But I knew what I'd seen, and I was starting to understand that something very bad was happening on this mountain. The next morning, nobody believed me about the reflection. How could they? I was starting to wonder if the altitude was making me see things. But I knew what I'd seen. Sarah acted completely normal during breakfast, talking about the storm data and planning the day's readings. But I noticed she avoided looking in any reflective surfaces. When she went to the bathroom, she kept her eyes down at the sink instead of looking in the mirror. Mike was getting paranoid about the mirrors too. During the morning equipment check, I found him taping cardboard over the bathroom mirror. "This is stupid," he muttered, but he kept taping. "It's just stupid altitude sickness or something, but I swear that thing was showing me doing stuff I wasn't doing." "Like what?" "Like..." He stopped taping and looked at me. "Like my reflection was trying to get out, pressing its hands against the glass from the inside." By noon, we'd covered or removed every mirror and reflective surface we could find in the station. But you can't avoid reflections completely. Windows at night, metal surfaces, even puddles of water, anything could become a mirror if the light was right. Dave was getting scared. He'd been trying the radio every hour, but we couldn't reach anyone. "We're completely cut off up here," he said. "And I don't like what's happening with these reflections. I think we should hike down to base camp." Janet shook her head. "That's a 3-day hike in good weather. With the snow conditions from the storm, it could take a week. And if another storm hits while we're on the mountain..." She didn't finish, but we all knew. We'd die out there. That afternoon, Mike found something in the ice field. He'd gone out to check the wind measurement equipment that was set up about halfway to where Sarah's tracks had disappeared. When he came back, his face was white. "There's something you guys need to see," he said, "but I don't think you're going to believe it." He led us back to the ice formations. Near the big mirror-like sheet where we'd seen Sarah's reflection, there was another ice formation that had been hidden behind it before. This one was like a doorway, an arch of ice about 7 feet high. And on the other side of the arch, we could see footprints in the snow. A lot of them. Going in both directions. "That wasn't there yesterday," Janet said. "I'm sure it wasn't there." Mike pointed at the tracks. "Look at them closer." I knelt down and studied the footprints. There were several different boot patterns. Sarah's boots, which we recognized from following her tracks, but also 3 other patterns that looked familiar. My boots, Mike's boots, Janet's boots. According to the tracks, all 4 of us had walked through this ice arch multiple times, but none of us had ever been here before. "This is wrong," Dave whispered. "This is really, really wrong." That's when we heard Sarah scream. It came from the direction of the station, high and terrified. We ran back as fast as we could in the deep snow. We found Sarah in the equipment room, backed up against the wall, staring at a piece of metal equipment that had a polished surface. She was shaking. "It's trying to get out," she gasped when she saw us. "My reflection. It's trying to get out of there." I looked at the metal surface. Her reflection looked normal to me. But Sarah was terrified. "It's been moving on its own," she said, "for the last 10 minutes, doing things I'm not doing, and now it's pushing against the metal like it's trying to break through." Mike grabbed a wrench and smashed the metal surface, denting it until it couldn't hold a reflection anymore. "We're getting out of here," he said. "First thing tomorrow morning, storm or no storm, we're hiking down this mountain." But that night, Mike didn't make it to morning. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass. I got up and found Mike in the bathroom, smashing the mirror with a hammer. He'd torn the cardboard off and was beating the mirror to pieces. "Mike, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just kept swinging the hammer, breaking the mirror into smaller and smaller pieces. Glass was everywhere. "Mike." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were completely blank, empty, like nobody was home inside his head. Then he raised the hammer and came at me. I dodged and ran for the main room, shouting for the others. Dave and Janet came running. Sarah was already up, sitting at the table like she'd been waiting for something to happen. We found Mike back in the bathroom. He was lying on the floor in the broken glass, bleeding from dozens of cuts. The hammer was still in his hand. He was dead. But in the biggest piece of broken mirror, I could see Mike's reflection. And the reflection was screaming silently, pounding its fists against the glass, trying to get our attention. The reflection was trapped. And something else was wearing Mike's body. We couldn't move Mike's body. Whatever was wearing it stood up an hour later and tried to kill Dave with the hammer. Janet managed to knock it down with a chair, and we locked it in the equipment room. But we could hear it in there, talking to itself in Mike's voice. Having conversations with someone who wasn't there. Sometimes it sounded like Mike. Sometimes it sounded like other people. People we didn't recognize. Dave was falling apart. What is that thing? What happened to Mike? Sarah was sitting by herself, staring out the window. When I looked closer, I realized she was looking at her own reflection in the glass. And she was crying. "Sarah," I said quietly, "how long have you been back?" She turned to look at me, and for just a second, her face was completely different, older, meaner, not Sarah at all. Then she blinked, and she was Sarah again. "What do you mean? When did you come back from the ice field?" "I told you, I never left. I was here the whole time." But her voice sounded wrong. Like someone doing an impression of Sarah's voice. That's when I figured it out. My face blindness had been protecting me. I couldn't tell people apart by their faces, so I relied on voices and mannerisms. And these weren't quite right. The thing pretending to be Sarah wasn't perfect at copying her. And if Sarah was replaced, and Mike was replaced, then I looked at Dave and Janet, really looked at them. Dave was sitting too still, not fidgeting with the radio equipment like he usually did. And Janet was standing with her weight on the wrong foot. She'd broken her left ankle years ago and always favored her right leg. They were all replaced, all of them. I was alone with things that looked like my friends. "I need some air," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to step outside for a minute." "Don't go too far," the thing that looked like Sarah said. "It's dangerous out there." I went outside and ran. I headed straight for the ice field, following our tracks from earlier. If my friends were trapped in reflections like I'd seen, maybe there was a way to get them back. The ice arch was still there, bigger now. And through it, I could see another version of the landscape on the other side. It looked the same, but wrong somehow. Like a photograph of our world, but with all the colors slightly off. I could hear the fake friends following me, calling my name. They sounded concerned, worried about my safety. But I knew better now. I stepped through the ice arch. On the other side, everything was backwards. The weather station was in the wrong place. The mountains went the wrong direction. And in the backwards station, I could see light in the windows. I ran to the backwards station and looked inside. All of my friends were there, the real ones. Sarah, Mike, Dave, and Janet. They were sitting around the table, but they looked pale and weak, like they were sick. When Sarah saw me through the window, she jumped up and ran to the door. But when she tried to open it, her hand went right through the handle like it was made of smoke. She was mouthing words at me through the window. I couldn't hear her, but I could read her lips. "Don't trust them. They're not us." Mike was pointing behind me. I turned around and saw the fake friends coming through the ice arch. They'd followed me into the mirror world. But here, they looked different. Less human. Their faces were wrong, like masks that didn't quite fit. And their reflections in the backward station's windows looked like the real people. "Rob," fake Sarah called out, "come back with us. You're getting confused. The altitude is making you see things." I looked back at the real Sarah trapped behind the window. She was shaking her head frantically. That's when I understood. This was a mirror world where reflections lived. Somehow, the reflections had found a way to trade places with the real people. The real people were trapped here, and the reflections were loose in the real world. And they wanted me too. The fake friends were getting closer. I had to find a way to switch everyone back before they trapped me here too. I ran around the backward station, looking for something, anything that might help. That's when I found it, an ice formation behind the station that was like a huge mirror, perfectly smooth and clear. In the mirror, I could see the real world. I could see the real weather station, and inside it, I could see myself. Another version of me, moving around like he owned the place. The reflection, Rob had taken my place too. Probably the moment I'd stepped through the arch. I was trapped in the mirror world, and a fake version of me was loose in the real world with fake versions of my friends. But I had one advantage. In this world, I could touch things that the real people couldn't. I could interact with their environment. I found a rock and threw it as hard as I could at the big mirror. It shattered. When the mirror broke, everything went white. I woke up lying in the snow outside the real weather station. My head was pounding, and I was freezing cold. But I was back in the real world. I ran inside and found my friends. The real ones. They were all unconscious, but they were breathing. Sarah was slumped over her weather equipment. Mike was on the floor of the bathroom, covered in glass, but not bleeding anymore. Dave and Janet were by the radio. It took me an hour to wake everyone up. They were all confused and weak, like they'd been asleep for days. None of them remembered much after the storm ended. I had the strangest dreams, Sarah said. I dreamed I was trapped behind glass, watching fake people pretend to be us. Mike found his hammer in the bathroom, next to the broken mirror. Why is there glass everywhere, and why do I feel like I haven't eaten in a week? Dave got the radio working that afternoon. The rescue helicopter came the next morning. When we got back to base camp, I tried to tell them what happened. But how do you explain that you were trapped in a mirror world by reflection-stealing creatures? They decided it was altitude sickness causing shared hallucinations, mass hysteria brought on by isolation and thin air. But I know what really happened, and I know it's not over. I transferred to a ground-level position after that. I removed every mirror from my house and avoid reflective surfaces as much as possible. But you can't avoid them completely. Sometimes, when I'm walking past a store window or a puddle of water, I see him. The reflection Rob. He's still there in the mirror world, still trying to find a way to trade places with me permanently. Other rangers have reported strange things at high altitude. Reflections that move wrong, people who seem familiar but act different. Tracks that lead nowhere. The ice arch is still there on Mount McKinley. I know because I've seen the satellite photos. It's bigger now. And sometimes, on clear days, pilots flying over the mountain report seeing people in the ice field. People who wave at the aircraft but don't show up on any thermal imaging. People who are just reflections. I sleep with the lights on now. Because in the dark, every black window becomes a mirror. And he's always there, waiting. My name is Victoria Thornfield, but everyone calls me Vic. I've been a park ranger at Kenai Fjords for 7 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these waters could throw at me. Rough storms, lost tourists, aggressive bears, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what happened that September in 1989. I was stationed at the remote research post on Resurrection Bay, about 12 miles from the nearest town. My job was simple. Watch the seal colonies, count the pups, and make sure the marine life stayed healthy. It was lonely work, but I loved it. The bay was beautiful, with its rocky shores and deep blue waters that stretched out to the mountains. That morning started like any other. I woke up in my small cabin at 6 a.m., made coffee, and checked the radio. Static, as usual. The radio tower on the mainland was old and spotty, especially when the weather got rough. I didn't worry about it much. I had enough supplies to last a month if needed. My fiancé Mark was back in Anchorage, working at the university. We'd been planning our wedding for next spring, and I was thinking about leaving the Park Service to join him in his research. This was supposed to be my last season at the bay, one final summer with the SEALs before I traded my ranger uniform for a lab coat. I grabbed my binoculars and headed down to the shore. The tide was low, perfect for checking on the seal colonies. But as soon as I reached the rocks, I knew something was off. The seals were acting strange. Instead of lying around on the rocks like they usually did, they were all facing the same direction, toward the deep water. They weren't moving, just sitting there like they were waiting for something. I'd never seen anything like it in 7 years. Seals are social animals, but they don't usually line up like soldiers. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. Maybe it was just a weird day. Animals do odd things sometimes. But then I noticed something else. Along the shoreline, there were small piles of rocks and seaweed arranged in perfect circles. They looked almost like decorations. Or maybe art. Each circle was exactly the same size, about 3 feet across. I walked along the beach, counting 12 circles in total. They were too perfect to be natural. Someone had to have made them, but who? I was the only person for miles around, and I definitely hadn't built any rock circles. The research station had 3 other people when I arrived 2 weeks ago. Dr. Reed, our marine biologist, Tom, his research assistant, and Jake, a local fisherman who helped with the boats. But they'd all left yesterday morning to pick up supplies in town. They weren't supposed to be back until tonight. I radioed back to the station. Base camp, this is Vic. Anyone there? Nothing but static. I tried again. Dr. Reed, Tom, anyone copy? Still nothing. The radio was working. I could hear the static clearly, but no one was answering. I decided to check the main research building. Maybe someone had come back early, and I just hadn't heard the boat. The building sat on a small hill, about a quarter mile from the shore. It housed our lab equipment, computers, and communication gear. As I walked up the path, I noticed more of those rock circles. They were everywhere now, leading from the water up toward the building. Someone had been very busy. The front door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal. The lab equipment was still running, the computers were on. But there was a strange smell in the air, like salt water and something else I couldn't place, something organic and fishy. On Dr. Reed's desk, I found his journal. The last entry was dated yesterday, but it was weird. His handwriting was different, more careful, like he was concentrating really hard on each letter. And the words didn't sound like him at all. The deep calls to us, he'd written. We must prepare the way. The circles are complete. Tonight we begin the greater work. Dr. Reed was a scientist. He didn't write poetic stuff like that. He wrote about water temperatures and fish populations. This didn't make sense. I tried the radio again. This time, I got through to the Coast Guard station in Seward. Coast Guard Seward, this is Ranger Thornfield at Resurrection Bay Research Station. Copy, Ranger Thornfield. What's your status? I'm alone at the station, but my team was supposed to return from town today. Have you had any reports of boat trouble in the area? Negative. No distress calls or incidents reported. Weather's been calm all day. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. If the weather was calm and there were no problems, where was everyone? I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to reach someone, anyone, who might know where my team was. But as the sun started to set, I was still alone. The seals were still lined up on the rocks, still facing the deep water. And those rock circles seemed to glow in the fading light. That night, I locked all the doors and windows. I'd never felt unsafe at the station before, but something was definitely wrong. As I lay in bed, I could hear strange sounds outside, like rocks being moved around, or maybe footsteps on the gravel. I told myself it was just animals, bears, maybe, or foxes looking for food. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Whatever was happening at Resurrection Bay, it was just getting started. I woke up to the sound of voices outside my cabin. Happy voices, laughing and talking like old friends. For a moment, I felt relief. My team was back. But then I looked at the clock. It was 3:17 a.m. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. In the moonlight, I could see 3 figures down by the shore. They were moving around the rock circles, but something was wrong with the way they walked. Their movements were too smooth, too coordinated, like they were dancing to music I couldn't hear. I grabbed my flashlight and jacket and headed outside. Tom, Dr. Reed, is that you guys? The figures stopped moving. Slowly, they turned toward me. Even from 50 yards away, I could see their faces clearly in the moonlight. It was my team, all right. But their eyes were wrong. They reflected the light like an animal's eyes, glowing pale blue in the darkness. Vic, Tom called out, waving at me like nothing was strange. Come help us, we're almost finished. I walked down toward them, my flashlight beam jumping around nervously. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day. The Coast Guard said there were no boat problems. We've been here the whole time, Dr. Reed said. His voice sounded distant, dreamy. Working on the project. What project? Jake, the fisherman, pointed to the water. Look what we built. I followed his gaze and almost dropped my flashlight. In the shallow water, just beyond the rock circles, was a structure I hadn't seen before. It looked like a small building made of stones and kelp, rising about 6 feet out of the water. The construction was impossible, intricate and beautiful, with arching doorways and spiraling towers. It would have taken a team of engineers weeks to build something like that, even on dry land. When did you build this? We've been working all night, Tom said. Every night since we got back. But you just got back tonight. You left yesterday morning. The three of them looked at each other, confusion flickering across their faces for just a moment. Then Dr. Reed smiled. Time moves differently now, Vic. You'll understand soon. A cold fear crept up my spine. What do you mean? The tide is changing, Jake said. Everything is changing. You can feel it, can't you? Now that he mentioned it, I could feel something. A pressure in the air, like before a big storm. But the sky was clear, full of stars. The feeling was coming from somewhere else. From the water? I think you guys need some sleep, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Let's head back to the station. We can talk about this in the morning. We don't sleep anymore, Tom said. We don't need to. The dreams come to us while we're awake now. That's when I noticed they were all soaking wet. Not just damp from sea spray, completely soaked, like they'd been underwater. Their clothes clung to their bodies, and seaweed hung from their hair. Small pools of water formed around their feet. You guys need to get dry, you'll catch pneumonia. But even as I said it, I realized they didn't look cold. They should have been shivering, maybe even showing signs of hypothermia. Instead, they looked comfortable, peaceful even. Dr. Reed stepped closer to me. Vic, you need to see what we've discovered. It's incredible. There's a whole civilization down there, waiting for us. Down where? In the deep places. The trenches where the old ones sleep. His eyes had that glowing quality again, like light was shining through them from inside. They'd been dreaming for so long, but now they're waking up. And they want to share their dreams with us. I backed away slowly. I think you guys hit your heads or something. Maybe there was an accident on the boat. We should get you to a hospital. Jake laughed, but it didn't sound like his laugh. It was too musical, too perfect. There was no boat, Vic. We never left. We've been here, learning, building, preparing. Preparing for what? The awakening, all three of them said at the same time. That's when I ran. I sprinted back up the hill to the research station, my heart hammering in my chest. Behind me, I could hear them calling my name, but they didn't sound upset or worried. They sounded patient, like they knew I'd be back. I slammed the door and locked it, then went straight to the radio. Mayday, Mayday, Coast Guard Seward, this is Ranger Thornfield. I need immediate assistance at Resurrection Bay Research Station. Static. Then, after a long pause, Ranger Thornfield, we copy. What's the nature of your emergency? How could I explain this? That my colleagues were building impossible structures underwater in the middle of the night? That their eyes glowed in the dark and they claimed not to need sleep anymore? I have 3 people here who may be suffering from hypothermia or some kind of psychological break. They've been in the water for hours and they're acting strangely. Copy that. We'll dispatch a rescue boat at first light. Can you provide medical assistance until then? I'll try. But when I looked out the window, my team was gone. The shore was empty except for that impossible structure rising out of the water. In the moonlight, it almost looked like it was breathing, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the waves. I spent the rest of the night watching from the window, but I didn't see them again. As dawn broke, I ventured outside. The structure was still there, but now I could see it clearly. It was made of stones that fit together so perfectly they looked melted rather than stacked. Kelp and seaweed wove through the gaps like living mortar. And there were more of them. 3 smaller structures had appeared overnight, scattered around the bay like the points of a compass. When the Coast Guard boat arrived at 8 a.m., I was waiting on the dock with my gear packed. But as I watched them approach, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The morning breeze was blowing toward shore, which meant it should have carried the sound of their engine to me, but I couldn't hear anything. The boat moved across the water in complete silence, like a ghost ship. As they got closer, I could see the crew waving at me. Normal, friendly waves, but there was something wrong with their faces. Even from a distance, I could see their eyes had that same pale glow I'd seen in my team. I stepped back from the dock. Whatever was happening at Resurrection Bay, it was spreading, and I was the only one left who could still see it for what it really was. The boat pulled up to the dock, and the captain called out to me. Ranger Thornfield? We're here to help. Why don't you come aboard? I shook my head and took another step back. I think I'll stay here for now. Thanks anyway. The captain's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his glowing eyes. "Are you sure? The water's so beautiful today. Perfect for a swim." That's when I knew I was completely alone. I ran back to the research station and barricaded myself inside. Through the windows, I watched the Coast Guard boat circle the bay slowly, like a shark looking for the best place to attack. The crew just stood on deck, smiling and waving whenever they saw me peeking out. After an hour, they finally left. But I knew they'd be back. I needed to figure out what was happening before it was too late. I went to Dr. Reed's computer and started going through his files. What I found made my hands shake. The data went back 3 weeks, to before I thought any of this started. Dr. Reed had been tracking something in the water. Temperature changes, unusual currents, weird chemical readings. But the most disturbing thing was his behavioral notes about the marine life. September 3rd, seals exhibiting coordinated behavior. Moving in formation underwater. Building structures from rocks and organic matter. September 7th, fish populations organizing into geometric patterns. Whales singing in harmony. Songs match no known whale communication. September 12th, first human contact. Jake reports strange dreams after swimming near deep-water research site. Dreams involve underwater cities and voices calling from below. September 15th. Tom and I experienced shared dream last night. Saw vast civilization in ocean trenches. Beings of immense intelligence offering to share their knowledge. Felt overwhelming sense of peace and purpose. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. We understand now. The entity in the deep places has been alone for millennia. It only wants to share its dreams, to connect with other minds. The process is harmless, better than harmless. It's evolution. I slammed the laptop shut. Dr. Reed was a scientist, trained to be objective and careful. If something could make him write like that, it was dangerous beyond anything I could imagine. I tried the satellite phone next. It took 3 tries to get through to the Park Service headquarters in Anchorage. "This is Ranger Thornfield at Resurrection Bay. I need to speak to Superintendent Morrison immediately." "Vic, this is Morrison. What's going on out there? We lost your regular check-in yesterday." "Sir, we have a situation here. I think there's some kind of contamination in the water. My entire team is acting strange, and now the Coast Guard crew that came to help is affected too." "What kind of contamination? Chemical? Biological?" I almost laughed. "How do you tell your boss that an ancient sea creature is turning people into sleepwalking servants?" "I'm not sure, sir, but I need immediate evacuation, and whatever you do, don't send any boats into the bay. The water seems to be the source." "Vic, you sound stressed. Are you sure you're not just dealing with some kind of group psychology thing? Isolation can do funny things to people." "Sir, they built structures underwater. Impossible structures, in one night." Long pause. "Vic, I'm going to send Dr. Martinez out there with a medical team. They can evaluate everyone, and—" "No." I shouted into the phone. "Sir, please, do not send anyone else. Whatever's in the water, it's spreading. I think I'm the only one left who isn't infected." Another long pause. "Vic, I need you to calm down. Dr. Martinez will be there tomorrow morning. Until then, just stay safe and try to get some rest." The line went dead. I realized I was completely on my own. That afternoon, I watched through binoculars as more boats arrived in the bay. Fishing boats, pleasure craft, even what looked like a research vessel from the university. They came from all directions, drawn to the bay like moths to a flame. Each boat that entered the water fell silent. The crews would stand on deck for a few minutes, then dive overboard and swim toward the structures. They could stay underwater for impossible amounts of time, 20, 30 minutes without coming up for air. By evening, there were dozens of people working on the structures. They moved in perfect coordination, passing stones and kelp to each other in an endless chain. The buildings grew taller and more complex by the hour. And then I saw something that made me sick with fear. Tom surfaced near the dock, but he wasn't alone. He was carrying a small bundle in his arms. As he got closer, I could see what it was. A child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The kid was conscious but completely calm, staring at the water with the same glowing eyes as everyone else. More people emerged from the boats, whole families, including elderly folks and toddlers. They all had the same peaceful expressions, the same glowing eyes. and they could all breathe underwater now. I watched in horror as parents guided their children into the water, teaching them to swim down to the structures. The kids adapted quickly, staying under for minutes at a time without any sign of distress. Whatever this thing was doing to people, it was changing their bodies as well as their minds. That night, I heard footsteps on the roof. Soft, careful footsteps that moved from one end of the building to the other. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside to investigate. Dr. Reed was standing on the roof, completely naked and dripping wet. In the moonlight, I could see the changes the water had made to his body. There were slits along his neck that opened and closed rhythmically, gills. His fingers were longer, with thin webs between them. "Hello, Vic," he said calmly. "We've been waiting for you to join us." "Dr. Reed, you need help. This isn't you talking. This is more me than I've ever been." He climbed down from the roof with fluid grace, moving like he was still underwater. "I can see everything now, Vic. The connections between all living things, the songs the ocean sings, the dreams that flow through the deep places. You're sick. Something in the water is making you sick." He laughed, and the sound was like waves lapping against rocks. "The water isn't making us sick, Vic. It's making us whole. Before, we were just fragments, individual pieces cut off from the greater consciousness. Now we're part of something beautiful." More figures emerged from the darkness around the building. Jake, Tom, the Coast Guard crew, people I didn't recognize. They all had the same physical changes. Gills, webbed fingers, skin that looked smooth and scaled in the moonlight. "You can fight it if you want," Dr. Reed said, "but it's easier if you don't. The dreams are wonderful once you stop resisting." "What dreams?" "The dreams of the deep one. It's been sleeping in the trenches for thousands of years, but now it's waking up, and it wants to share its gifts with us. Immortality, Vic, perfect knowledge, unity with all ocean life." I backed toward the door of the station. "You mean possession. It's possessing you." "Partnership," Jake corrected. "We're still ourselves, just more than ourselves." Tom nodded. "The entity doesn't want to control us, Vic. It wants to elevate us. Take us to the next stage of evolution. And if I say no?" Dr. Reed smiled sadly. "Then you'll be alone forever. The only one left outside the collective. Is that really what you want?" I slammed the door and locked it, but I could hear them talking outside. They weren't trying to break in, they were just waiting. Through the window, I watched the structures in the bay continue to grow. They were massive now, reaching up toward the surface like underwater skyscrapers. And at the center of it all, something huge was rising from the deep water. Something that looked like it had been sleeping on the ocean floor for a very long time. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I started to dream about underwater cities and voices calling my name from the deep. The infection was trying to get in through my dreams. By morning, the thing in the center of the bay had almost reached the surface. It was enormous, bigger than a whale, but shaped wrong. Too many angles, too many appendages that moved like they were feeling through water, even though they were in air. Dr. Martinez's helicopter arrived at 8 a.m. I tried to wave them off, running outside and waving my arms frantically. But the pilot just circled the bay once and landed on the beach near the structures. I watched through binoculars as Dr. Martinez and his medical team got out. They looked around at all the naked, web-fingered people working in the water, but they didn't seem alarmed. Within minutes, they were stripping off their own clothes and walking into the bay. The infection was airborne now. Just being near the water was enough. I sealed myself in the communication room and tried one last time to reach the outside world. The radio crackled to life, but instead of normal chatter, I heard something else, singing. Dozens of voices singing in perfect harmony, a song that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to my brain. The song was beautiful, more beautiful than anything I'd ever heard. It promised peace, knowledge, belonging. All I had to do was open the door and walk down to the water. I almost did it. My hand was on the doorknob when I caught sight of myself in the mirror. There were small slits forming on either side of my neck. The infection was already inside me. I had maybe an hour before I became like the others. 1 hour to do something, anything, to stop this thing from spreading beyond the bay. I remembered the explosives. Dr. Reed kept a small supply of underwater charges for his deep-sea research. If I could destroy the main structure, maybe I could disrupt whatever process was happening. The charges were in a locked cabinet in the lab. As I worked to break it open, I could hear footsteps in the hallway. The others had come inside the station. "Vic," Tom's voice, calm and patient, "we know you're scared, but you don't have to be. The transformation is beautiful once you accept it." I got the cabinet open and grabbed 3 charges. Each one was about the size of a soda can, powerful enough to blast holes in rock for collecting samples. I stuffed them in a waterproof bag along with the remote detonator. "The deep one wants to meet you," Dr. Reed called out. "It's curious about the one who resists. It thinks you're special." The footsteps were closer now. They were right outside the lab door. I smashed the window with a chair and climbed through, cutting my hands on the broken glass. Behind me, I heard the door open. "Oh, Vic," Dr. Reed said sadly, "you're bleeding. The salt water will help with that." I ran toward the shore, the charges bouncing in the bag. The gills on my neck were opening and closing now, trying to filter oxygen from the air like they were meant for water. Each breath was getting harder. The main structure towered above me, 60 feet of impossible architecture that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at it, and in the center, the entity was almost fully emerged. I could see it clearly now, something like a cross between an octopus and a jellyfish, but the size of a building. Its translucent body pulsed with inner light, and dozens of tentacles as thick as tree trunks reached out toward the smaller structures. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, ancient and wise and absolutely alien. People were swimming around it, touching its tentacles, pressing their faces against its body. They looked ecstatic, like they were experiencing pure joy. Even from the shore, I could feel its pull, the promise of peace, of belonging, of answers to every question I'd ever had. But I also saw what it was really doing. Each person who touched it came away changed. Not just gills and webbed fingers, but something deeper. Their faces became smoother, more symmetrical, their movements perfectly synchronized. They were becoming parts of a larger organism, losing their individual selves piece by piece. I waded into the water, fighting every instinct that told me to dive deep and swim toward the entity. The charges felt heavy in my hands. I had to get close enough to place them at the base of the main structure, right where it connected to the entity. Tom surfaced in front of me. "Vic, don't do this. You don't understand what you're destroying." "I understand perfectly," I gasped. The water was up to my waist now, and I could feel it working its way into my bloodstream through the cuts on my hands. "It's taking away everything that makes you human." "Humanity is a cage," Jake said, appearing on my other side. "This is freedom." Dr. Reed emerged behind them. "The collective consciousness is perfect, Vic. No more loneliness, no more confusion. We all think together, dream together. Every experience is shared." "That's not life," I said. "That's death." The entity pulsed brighter, and suddenly I was inside its mind. I saw its memories stretching back millions of years. It had been alone in the deep places, the last of its kind, dreaming of the civilizations that had once thrived in Earth's ancient oceans. It wasn't evil, just desperately lonely. For eons, it had tried to communicate with the small, brief lives that swam in the waters above, but they always died before any real connection could be made. Humans were different. Humans had the potential for the kind of consciousness it remembered from its own people. If it could just modify them a little, help them evolve past their limitations, they could become its companions, its children. Its species could live again through them. It didn't understand that what made humans special was exactly what it was trying to change. I felt its confusion as I pulled the first charge from the bag. It had given us everything: immortality, perfect knowledge, unity with all ocean life. Why did I still resist? Because I loved Mark. Because I had memories of my childhood that belonged to me alone. Because sometimes being confused and scared and alone was better than being part of something that wasn't really you. Dr. Reed grabbed my arm as I tried to arm the first charge. His grip was incredibly strong, and his skin felt wrong, smooth and cold like a fish. "Please, Vic, you're the last one. When you join us, we'll be complete. The entity will have enough consciousness to reach out to the other oceans, to share this gift with the entire world." I looked into his eyes and saw nothing left of the man who had taught me about marine ecosystems, who had worried about his daughter's college tuition, who had always shared his coffee when the supply ran low. "I'm sorry," I said, and triggered the first charge. The explosion sent a shockwave through the water. The main structure cracked down one side, and the entity's light flickered. All around the bay, the converted humans stopped moving and turned toward me. I armed the second charge and swam toward the base of the structure, even as dozens of hands grabbed at me from below. They weren't trying to hurt me. Even now, they were trying to save me from myself. The entity's consciousness pressed against my mind, showing me images of what the world could become. Cities beneath the waves, where humans and sea creatures lived in harmony. No more pollution, no more wars, no more loneliness. Everyone connected, everyone part of the same beautiful dream. For a moment, I almost believed it, almost dropped the charges, and let myself sink into that perfect, peaceful collective. But then I thought about Mark, waiting for me in Anchorage, planning our wedding, believing I was coming home. I thought about all the people who would never get to choose for themselves if this thing spread beyond the bay. I placed the second charge against the entity itself. Its pain flooded through me, not anger, but deep, heartbroken disappointment. It had been so close to ending its loneliness forever. The third charge went at the base of the largest support structure. As I armed it, I felt the entity withdrawing, pulling back toward the deep places. It knew it had lost. The explosions came one after another, each one sending cracks through the impossible architecture. The structures collapsed in slow motion, sinking back into the dark water. The entity gave one last pulse of brilliant light and then dove deep, its massive form disappearing into the trenches. All around the bay, the converted humans stood in the water, looking lost and confused. The glow faded from their eyes, and one by one, they began to remember who they had been. Dr. Reed surfaced next to me, coughing up seawater. The gills on his neck were closing up, leaving only faint scars. "Vic, what happened? How did we get in the water?" I helped him back to shore, my own gills sealing shut as we left the bay behind. "I'll explain everything later. Right now, we need to get everyone medical attention." But even as we organized the rescue efforts, even as the helicopters arrived to take the survivors to hospitals, I knew it wasn't over. The entity was still down there in the deep places, wounded, maybe, but not dead. And now it knew that not all humans would willingly join its stream. Next time, it might not be so gentle. The official report called it a mass hallucination brought on by algae toxins in the water. The Coast Guard found trace amounts of unusual chemicals in the bay, enough to explain the strange behavior if you didn't look too closely at the details. Most of the survivors didn't remember much. Dr. Reed thought he'd had a diving accident. Tom remembered weird dreams about underwater cities, but figured they were just stress-related. Jake went back to his fishing boat and never mentioned the bay again. The physical changes faded over time. The gill slits healed into thin scars that doctors dismissed as old injuries. The webbed fingers returned to normal. Blood tests came back clean after a few weeks. But I remembered everything. And I still had dreams. In my dreams, I could feel the entity far below, waiting in the deepest trenches of the Pacific. Sometimes I sensed others like it, scattered across the ocean floors of the world. Ancient intelligences that had been dreaming alone for millions of years, finally stirring in response to their cousin's failed experiment. They were patient. They had time. I left the Park Service and moved to Colorado, as far from the ocean as I could get. Mark and I got married the following spring, and I thought I was done with the water forever. But 10 years later, I got a call from the new superintendent at Kenai Fjords. "Dr. Thornfield, this is Superintendent Walsh. We have a situation at Resurrection Bay that we'd like your expertise on. Some of our researchers are reporting unusual animal behavior in the area." I felt that familiar cold fear creep up my spine. What kind of behavior? Coordinated movement patterns in the seal colonies, and they've found some interesting rock formations on the seafloor, structures that look almost architectural. "Sir, I strongly recommend you evacuate that area immediately." "I'm sorry?" "Dr. Thornfield, these formations could be a significant archaeological discovery. We can't just—" I hung up the phone. That afternoon, I drove straight through from Colorado to Alaska. It took me 3 days, stopping only for gas and coffee. Mark tried to call a dozen times, but I couldn't explain it to him. How do you tell someone that an ancient sea god is waking up again, and you might be the only person left who knows how to stop it? I reached Resurrection Bay just as the new research team was setting up their equipment. 5 young scientists, fresh out of graduate school, and eager to make their mark. They had sonar readings of the structures, underwater cameras, everything they needed to get close to the entity. "You can't go in the water," I told their team leader, a marine biologist named Dr. Sarah Chen. "Excuse me? And you are?" "Victoria Thornfield. I was the ranger here 10 years ago when the last team had their accident." Dr. Chen looked me up and down, taking in my desperate appearance and the fear in my eyes. "Miss Thornfield, I appreciate your concern, but we're fully trained in underwater safety procedures. The structures we've found could rewrite our understanding of marine ecosystems. They're not natural formations, and they're not safe. The geological survey clearly shows." I grabbed her arm. "Dr. Chen, I'm begging you, pack up your equipment and leave. Tonight. Don't let anyone go in the water, don't even touch it. Just go." She pulled away from me. "Miss Thornfield, I think you need help. The stress of isolation can have lasting psychological effects. Maybe you should speak to someone." That night, I watched from the hills as their underwater lights illuminated the bay. Through binoculars, I could see the structures rising from the seafloor. Different from before, but unmistakably the same architecture. The entity had been busy during its decade of recovery. The team spent 3 days collecting samples and taking pictures. On the 4th day, I saw Dr. Chen standing on the dock at 3 a.m., staring at the water with glowing eyes. I'd failed again, but this time I was ready. In my truck, I had 50 pounds of military-grade explosives and a detailed plan of the bay's underwater geography. If the entity wanted to keep trying, I'd keep stopping it. Because someone had to. Someone had to stand between that ancient loneliness and the rest of the world. I made my camp on the hills above the bay and settled in to watch. The entity was patient, but so was I. And unlike it, I understood the value of being alone with my thoughts. In my dreams, I could feel it calling to me from the deep places. It remembered me now, the one who had resisted its gift. Sometimes I sensed curiosity in those dreams, sometimes sadness, but mostly I sensed determination. It would keep trying to share its dreams with the world, and I would keep stopping it for as long as I could. It wasn't much of a life, but it was mine, and that, I had learned, was worth everything. Down in the bay, Dr. Chen and her team worked through the night, building something beautiful and terrible from stones and kelp. In the deep water, ancient eyes watched and waited. The cycle was beginning again.